Hey, if you're a Led Zeppelin fan, or if you like the videos that we make on this channel about Led Zeppelin, which seem to be a lot these days, I think you'll get a huge kick out of this particular video that we're going to do today. Back in 1973, this is a few months after Houses of the Holy had been released. I mean, really, Led Zeppelin was really just the biggest rock band in the world. I mean, nobody was really touching them at that point. And there's this article that came out. This was published in the Los Angeles Times. This is June of 1973. So this is just a few months after Led Zeppelin, after Houses of the Holy has come out. And this article is called Case for and Against Led Zeppelin. Now, what makes so many of these articles fascinating, the things that we share on this channel, is the hindsight. And to read what people were saying at the time and to see how it aged. And this is a great example of how people at the time, how they were analyzing what was happening with Led Zeppelin and what they were, kind of what their legacy was going to be like. And when you hear what this person says about Led Zeppelin at the time and what they thought was going to be the future of Led Zeppelin, it's fascinating to hear. And then again, to look back and say, how accurate were they? How were they perceived at the time? And how close were they in perceiving this? So anyway, I want to share this with you. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's not very long, but I think you'll love this. Again, this is from the Los Angeles Times. This is June 2nd, 1973 on page 35. And the title again is Case for and Against Led Zeppelin. Here's the case for Led Zeppelin and those who feel it has now passed the Rolling Stones as the world's top rock and roll group. Exhibit A, Led Zeppelin is popular. All 36,000 tickets for the English rock band's 2 appearances this week at the Inglewood Forum were sold in 2 hours. That's faster than any rock show in Forum history, including the Rolling Stones. The first concert was Thursday night. The second, rescheduled from Wednesday after Jimmy Page sprained a finger, will be Sunday night. By the way, I know we have a lot of people that watch this channel that have actually seen some of these concerts that are referenced in some of our videos. If you saw these or knew anything about that, would love to hear it. Please put that in the comments. Exhibit B, Led Zeppelin is commercial. Each of the group's 5 albums has easily passed the $1 million mark. In addition, their current U.S. tour is breaking one box office record after another, starting last month in Tampa with an appearance that overturned a 1965 Beatles mark for the largest crowd to see one group in concert. The Tampa show drew 56,800 persons. Upwards of 55,000 are expected to see Zeppelin Saturday at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco. Okay. Let's see here. And by the way, I wonder when it says each of the 5 albums has easily passed the $1 million mark. I wonder, I have to wonder if that's what they meant to say, because each of their albums had passed the 1 million in sales. And like Zeppelin 4, the album prior to the Houses of the Holy had been up and it had sold somewhere north of, at this point, north of 10 million, maybe closing in on 20 million by this point. And so it can't, I don't think they can possibly mean $1 million. I think that they must be saying that each of their albums had sold at least 1 million copies. Anyway, just it threw me off when I read that. It just didn't seem quite right. But again, they're just drawing, the point is they've had enormous sales and they're filling up these large places. Exhibit C, Led Zeppelin, through both its music and stage appearance, is probably the quintessential rock band of the moment. The group that best summarizes the most successful elements of rock over the past decade. If you wanted to do a film about a rock band, Led Zeppelin could play the part well. Robert Plant is the classic, sexy, aggressive, colorful male singer. Jimmy Page is a guitarist with a range and the ability to capture an audience's imagination with his electronic experimentation. John Bonham is able to provide an evening of consistent sledgehammer drumming and cap his performance with a 20-minute solo. And it's interesting, we've had a lot of people on this channel on different Led Zeppelin videos tell us about their experiences just at Led Zeppelin concerts, and talk about those epic drum solos that Bonham would do that would really go on for a really long time. And they're 3-hour concerts that Led Zeppelin would do. Bassist John Paul Jones provides a steady undercurrent of tension to the group's sound. Though there are softer moments, i.e. Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin's music is chiefly loud, bold, and rebellious. When it offers songs like Whole Lotta Love, Black Dog, and Rock and Roll, it can generate as much raw urgency and power as any band now active in rock. In fact, there was as much tension and energy in the Forum when Led Zeppelin went on stage Thursday as any time since the Rolling Stones' 1969 Forum concerts. Now, the case against Led Zeppelin. And so this is the part, just listen to this carefully. This is the part where we get a real sense of their perspective at the time, and because there's a couple things in here where they kind of say what the future is. And I think this is so interesting, putting this in perspective now that we have hindsight. Okay. Exhibit A, the band simply isn't significant, either in a creative or sociological sense. When the final history of rock and roll is written, there will be entire chapters devoted to the truly important figures in rock, the artists whose skills, either as writers or interpreters, shaped the music by bringing it a personal vision that provided new strengths and directions. Presley, the Beatles, the Stones, Dylan, Hendrix will certainly have chapters. Others who will be treated at length for their creative contributions, The Who, the Kinks, Cream, the Band, the Beach Boys, Joplin, among many. But Led Zeppelin, on the basis of his work to date, and it's funny that it says his. Anyway, I'm sure this person understands clearly that it's not his, but will belong in a separate, less important category of successful bands who reflect some of the vigor of rock, but ultimately borrowed more from rock's heritage than it ended up contributing. Others in this category would include Grand Funk Railroad, 10 Years After, Deep Purple, Iron Butterfly, among dozens. That is so interesting, listening to them putting Led Zeppelin. Again, at the time, it kind of makes sense, but from the perspective of history, where Grand Funk Railroad, I mean, they were a great band. I mean, I got a whole bunch of their stuff in the record collection, but they're largely forgotten. I mean, you hear American Band on classic rock radio, but, again, gone. 10 Years After, how often do you hear their stuff? I mean, I'd Love to Change the World might be on classic rock every once in a while. I've got 10 Years After stuff in the collection, but again, an Iron Butterfly. And now they mentioned Deep Purple, and Deep Purple actually did have staying power after this point. I mean, here we are in 1973. This is when Deep Purple started falling apart. Ian Gillan leaves about this time, and then soon followed by Glover. And anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But again, it's interesting to have Led Zeppelin and look at the category of people that bands that they put them in here. While its musicianship and occasional power is greater than most of the others in the secondary category, Led Zeppelin lacks the crucial element necessary to move up into the higher level: creativity. The band is explosive, but has no writer strong enough to direct that power in any meaningful, permanent way. The music is ultimately empty and unsatisfying. Now, again, I find this, and I was just a couple of years old at the time, so I was not, all my vision of this is hindsight, learning about this stuff much later. But when you consider that this is after Led Zeppelin's fourth album that he's making these comments. Now, I understand, there are songs that really did borrow on the traditional blues music. To have a statement that that the songs on Led Zeppelin 4 didn't have any sort of creativity and no writer strong enough to direct that power in any meaningful or permanent way. And when you look at Led Zeppelin 4, the compositions on that album alone, it's hard for me, again, in hindsight, to know how you could make that statement just on when that album existed alone, let alone 3, 2, 1, and Houses of the Holy, which had really some spectacular compositions on those things, and what I would consider, like people that are in their creative element. Anyway, and they're right. So much what they did was borrowing from the old blues stuff, but I don't know, man. You step into okay. I don't want to get off on this too much, but it's those kind of statements that I go, I wasn't paying attention at the time. I was too young. What am I missing? That people would make this comment. Okay. The music is ultimately empty and unsatisfying. Zeppelin, in many ways, seems like a last look at the rock and roll of the 1960s for a new generation of audiences that perhaps feels the Stones and the Who no longer represent them and weren't able to feel the full impact of Cream and Hendrix. But for the audience that saw these other acts at their peak, it's hard to find anything to celebrate in Zeppelin. Its popularity is perhaps the strongest testimony we have to the fact that this is a troubled time for rock. That, again, is amazing. Basically saying that the reason Led Zeppelin is as popular as they are, I guess the point is because everything else is so terrible. Anyway, just so interesting. The music is in need of new direction and new vision. When it comes along, hopefully soon, Led Zeppelin will probably be forgotten. It's hard to stick by something that doesn't give you any reason to believe. Exhibit B. Don't let the box office figures mislead you. Put the Stones or the Who or even Jethro Tull, possibly, head-to-head against Zeppelin in Tampa, Los Angeles, or Kezar Stadium and watch who wins. Mark your ballot. Anyway, wow. And sure, the Who, the Stones, certainly at that time were big enough to fill some massive places. And I guess Jethro Tull was too. I mean, because this was Aqualung period. Yeah, actually Aqualung came out even a couple of years before this. And so they were a pretty big group at the time. I have a whole bunch of their stuff in the collection too, and I like Jethro Tull. Don't get me wrong, but again, it's so interesting to put this in perspective. You have this person that at the time is looking at Led Zeppelin and saying there's no there, and there's no way these guys are going to matter in the long term. They might be popular right this second, and they might be one of the biggest things in the world, but this won't last. And it's so interesting because they put him in like Grand Funk Railroad, when they put him in that group. That's an example of a band that was one of the biggest bands in the world for a short period of time. And then they just kind of they really were. I mean, they were monsters. They were huge, but then everybody moved on. And this person put Led Zeppelin in that category when ultimately they couldn't have been more wrong about that. If there's ever been a band that had staying power, and the reason I've been thinking about this so much lately is those of you that saw the show where I talked about the song Kashmir, how I pulled into that. I go to the gym at 4:00 in the morning every day, and I pulled into the parking lot, and somebody was pulled in right after me, and they're blaring Kashmir out there, out the window. This is again 4:00 in the morning. And I'm just kind of stand there for a second because I have to say something, and the guy gets out of his car heading into the gym, and the guy's like 21, 22, just a kid to me. And it was just it was so interesting to see that you've got this music that has transcended. You've got a couple of different generations that have passed by now, and that music just continues to resonate with young crowds, with young people still. And I'd love to get your feedback on this article. If you saw them in concert, what was your perspective at the time too? And also, if you're like me, because I know probably most of the people that watch this channel based on the stats are about my age, that you kind of discovered this stuff later. What was your perspective of Led Zeppelin, and how did they fit into your personal musical journey as you discovered music, probably like I did in the early 80s when I started coming of age and learning, and then looking back, because Led Zeppelin was over at that point, and going back and started and discovering all this amazing stuff. And then also, so many people watching this channel because of the age group, you have now kids that grew up. How have they responded to that, to this band, to this music? Do your kids respond to Led Zeppelin the way you did? Because I know I have, I've seen that in my own family with my own kids, where some of this older stuff really, really resonates with them in a really spectacular way. Anyway, I'd love to hear about that. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.